All right, everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah, welcome back.
Today, we're talking about something that is so essential if you're out there, in the job market. And especially if English is the language that you're working in, we're going to be talking about resumes, or as they're known in some places, CVs.
Yes, crafting an effective resume, one that really works. And in English, this can be particularly challenging, especially for non-native speakers.
Yeah, and that's why we've been looking at this, this really comprehensive guide. It's designed specifically for English learners who are putting together resumes for, jobs where they're going to be using English. And I think it has a lot of really good tips that apply to everybody.
Absolutely. It's packed with great advice.
So our mission today in this deep dive is to try to extract that knowledge and give you some very practical, concrete steps you can take to build a resume that stands out.
Yeah, because ultimately, what's the goal of a resume?
Well, it's got to get you that interview.
Exactly. It's your first impression. It's your chance to make a case for why an employer should bring you in for a conversation.
Yeah, and this guide really nicely, breaks it down and says, the resume has to do three main things.
Okay.
It's got to get you that interview.
Right.
It's got to highlight your qualifications, and it's got to match what the employer's looking for in that job description.
That makes sense.
Right? You got to make that match.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, the language you use, the way you structure your resume, can have a real psychological impact on a hiring manager.
Oh, yeah.
So, active language, for example, it's not just describing what you did, it conveys this sense of proactivity, a sense of accomplishment in a way that passive phrasing just doesn't.
So the guide takes us through these different ways to actually structure the information.
Right.
So maybe we should just start with an overview of the different types of resumes you might encounter.
Absolutely. So you've got the chronological resume, the functional resume, and then a combination of the two. And each one really emphasizes different aspects of your professional background.
Okay, so let's break each one of those down a little bit.
Yeah.
What's the chronological one all about?
So the chronological resume, as the name suggests, it presents your work history in reverse chronological order.
Okay.
Starting with your most recent position and working backwards. It's the most common format, and it's usually pretty effective, particularly if you have a consistent work history, in a related field.
Makes sense. And the guide gives us a pretty clear visual of how that looks on the page, right?
It does, yeah. So for each job, you're going to list the job title, the company name, and the dates of employment.
Okay.
Then you'll use bullet points to describe your responsibilities and, crucially, your key achievements.
Okay, so it's not just like, I did this and I did this and I did this. It's more like, I achieved this, right?
Exactly. Quantify it whenever you can. So, instead of saying assisted customers with product selection, which is fine,
Yeah.
you could say something like achieved a 15% increase in monthly sales.
Ooh, I like that much better.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Demonstrates impact.
Yeah, you want to see those numbers.
Exactly.
Okay, so chronological is great for showing, how your career's progressed.
Yeah.
When would someone choose a functional resume?
So a functional resume shifts the focus away from that timeline
Okay.
and puts the spotlight on your skills.
Okay.
This can be a really good choice if you're changing careers or if you have some gaps in your employment history, or maybe you want to highlight very specific skill sets that might not be immediately obvious from your job titles.
Okay, so the layout is quite different than I imagine.
It is, yeah. So typically it'll start with a skills summary section
Okay.
right at the top. And then under that, you have these bullet points that showcase your abilities.
Okay.
Again, quantify whenever possible, but this time you're grouping them under skills, not jobs.
Okay.
So for instance, instead of listing a customer service job, you would have a section titled customer service,
Right.
with the bullet point like handled 50 plus customer inquiries daily. It really draws attention to your proficiency in that area, regardless of the specific job title.
So it's more about what you can do than where you did it.
Exactly.
Okay. And then the combination resume, I imagine, that kind of tries to bridge those two.
Exactly. It's a blend of both the chronological and functional.
Okay.
A common structure is to start with a brief professional summary that highlights your key skills and experience.
Okay.
Then you have a more detailed key skills section with bullet points, and then a chronological work experience section.
So you kind of get the best of both worlds.
Yeah. It allows experienced professionals, especially those with a broad range of skills, to highlight their abilities right away while still providing that clear overview of their career path.
Yeah, I like that.
So yeah, you've got the summary, the key skills, and then the work experience.
Got it. Okay, so once you've decided which type of resume best suits your situation,
Right.
what are those essential sections that absolutely need to be included no matter what?
Regardless of the format, there are some core components that every effective resume needs.
Okay. Let's hear it.
So first and foremost is your contact information.
Right.
I mean, this might seem obvious, but accuracy and professionalism are key here.
Okay, so what are the specifics? What do you absolutely need to include in that contact information?
So you need your full name, a phone number where you can actually be reached, a professional email address.
Ooh, yeah. We should definitely talk about what makes an email address professional,
Definitely.
because I've seen some bad ones out there.
Oh, yeah. And then optionally, a link to your LinkedIn profile if you have one and it's up to date.
Okay.
So the example they give is just, John Smith, phone number, email address, and LinkedIn URL. Nice and straightforward.
Simple but crucial.
Absolutely.
Okay, what's next?
Next up is either a professional summary or an objective statement.
Okay.
Now, a summary is generally more appropriate for people who have some work experience under their belts.
Okay.
It's a brief paragraph, just a few sentences, summarizing your key skills, relevant experience, and career goals.
And what about the objective? Is that more for people who are just starting out?
Yeah, typically used by recent graduates or those with limited professional experience.
Right.
It outlines your career aspirations and how you hope to apply your skills in the role that you're seeking.
Okay, so they give some good contrasting examples.
They do.
Like for a summary, they say like detail-oriented accountant with 5 years of experience,
Right.
Focusing on the past.
Exactly.
And then for objective, recent business graduate seeking an entry-level marketing position.
Yeah, more forward-looking.
More future aspirations.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so summary, if you've got some work history objective, if you're just beginning.
Exactly.
Okay, and then next, I imagine this is where the bulk of the information sits. What about work experience?
You're right. It's the meat of the resume.
Okay.
As we talked about with the chronological resume, you list your previous jobs in reverse chronological order, but the guide really stresses the importance of using strong action verbs to describe your responsibilities and, even more importantly, your accomplishments.
Yeah, we should definitely come back to action verbs because those are so important.
Absolutely.
But just sticking with this section for a second, what kind of information do you include under each job you list?
So for each position, include your official job title, the full company name, and the specific dates of employment.
Okay.
And then those all-important bullet points come in.
Right.
So they give an example of a customer service representative at, Tech Solutions, Inc.
Right.
And then bullet points, a number of customer inquiries handled per day, percentage of complaints resolved, even things like whether you were involved in training new team members.
So really spelling out what you did and how well you did it.
Exactly. And quantifying it whenever possible.
Yeah, numbers are so helpful.
They make it tangible.
Okay, after work experience, what's next?
Next up is education. So here you list your academic qualifications, starting with your most recent degree or diploma and working backwards.
Okay.
For each entry, include the full name of the degree, the name of the university or institution, your year of graduation, and if you had any significant honors like Dean's List or particularly strong GPA, include that as well.
Okay.
So they have a good example, Bachelor of Science and Computer Science, graduation date, and then they put, GPA 3.8 Dean's List.
Perfect.
Straightforward.
Okay, so we've covered contact info summary or objective work experience education. What other sections are really vital?
So next you have your skills section.
Okay, and this is where you get to really show what you can do, right?
Exactly. And the guide does a nice job of breaking this down into two categories, hard skills and soft skills.
Okay, what's the distinction there?
So hard skills are your technical abilities, specific, teachable, often measurable things like proficiency, in particular software programs or programming languages. Soft skills, on the other hand, are more interpersonal skills, personal attributes, things like communication, teamwork, problem solving.
Got it.
So you want to have a good mix of both. They list some examples, technical skills, Python, Excel, Photoshop, and then soft skills, leadership, problem solving, time management. Really tailor it to the types of jobs you're applying for.
So you want to show that you have both the technical know-how and the people skills.
Exactly.
Okay, now the guide also mentions certifications and additional sections as being optional.
Yeah.
When are those really worth including?
So these can be really valuable for making your resume stand out.
Yeah.
If the relevant certifications are formal recognitions of specific skills or knowledge that you've acquired.
Okay.
So things like Google Analytics certification or project management professional PMP,
Yeah.
additional sections could include things like language proficiency if you're fluent in multiple languages. Definitely highlight that.
Yes.
Relevant volunteer work or personal projects that demonstrate skills that employers are looking for those can be strong additions as well.
So if you've got them and they're relevant, include them.
Absolutely.
Okay, now let's talk about action verbs, because we touched on this before.
Yes.
Why are these so critical on a resume?
Action verbs are really the key to injecting dynamism and impact into your resume.
Ooh, I like that.
Instead of passively stating what your responsibilities were,
Right.
they actively showcase what you did and what you accomplished.
I like that.
They paint a much clearer and more compelling picture of your contributions.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. It's the difference between saying responsible for and managed or led.
Right.
It's a subtle shift, but it makes a big difference.
Huge difference. And the guide has some excellent examples of action verbs broken down by category.
Yeah, they have them categorized by management, communication, technical, creative.
Oh, that's handy.
It is really helpful. So for management, you have words like led, supervised, coordinated, managed communication. You have presented, negotiated, wrote, communicated, technical, programmed, analyzed, developed, implemented, created, design, developed, illustrated, created.
So that's really useful just to kind of jog your memory and think, oh, what did I actually do in this role?
Absolutely. And they give a really good example of a before and after to show the impact.
Oh, yeah. I love that.
So they start with a weak passive statement like, was responsible for sales reports.
Right. Very bland.
Very bland. And then they transform it using strong action verbs to generated and analyzed weekly sales reports identifying key trends that led to a 20% increase in sales.
Oh, that's much better.
Right. It's active, it quantifies the achievement, and it uses those strong, direct words.
Love it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about what you should do. What about things to avoid common mistakes?
Yeah, the guide covers that as well.
Okay, what are some of the biggest red flags that can just totally sink your resume?
Right at the top of the list, spelling and grammar errors.
Ah.
This is such a quick way to make a negative impression.
Yeah.
It's just a lack of attention to detail.
Yeah, which is not something you want to project.
Not at all. So use spell check grammar tools. Get a native speaker to review it if you can.
Absolutely crucial. I mean, nothing undermines your credibility faster than typos and grammatical errors.
Agreed.
What else? What's another common pitfall?
Length is a big one.
Okay.
While it can vary depending on your level of experience, generally aim for 1 page if you have less experience and no more than 2 pages for more seasoned professionals.
Yeah, you got to be concise and focus on the most relevant information.
Exactly. Recruiters often have to sift through tons of applications, so you want to make it easy for them.
Okay, what else?
Your email address might seem like a small detail, but it matters.
Oh, yeah.
Using an unprofessional email address.
Like, party animal from 1999, .com.
Exactly. Like the example they give, superfan123 at email.com.
Yeah, no.
Not a good look.
No.
Stick to a professional format, first and last name.
First name dot last name at email.com.
Much better.
Okay. And what's the last big mistake that the guide highlights?
Not tailoring your resume to each job you apply for.
Oh, that's a big one.
Huge mistake a lot of people make. Sending out a generic resume is much less likely to get you noticed. You
Yeah.
really need to customize it, match those keywords, skills, and requirements mentioned in the job description.
Show them that you've done your homework.
Exactly. And you might even look for specific action verbs that they use in the description and try to incorporate those where appropriate into your resume.
Oh, I like that. That's a really good tip.
It shows that you're paying attention.
Yeah.
That you're tailoring it to their needs.
Okay, so we've covered the structure, the essential sections, the power of action verbs, the common mistakes to avoid to really bring it all together.
Yeah.
The guide provides a sample resume, right?
It does. It's a really nice visual example of how all these elements come together in a real resume. It's for a fictional person named Jane Doe, but you can see all the components clearly laid out: her contact information, a concise professional summary, her work experience, including roles like social media intern and retail assistant, and they use those effective bullet points to showcase her responsibilities and her quantifiable achievement.
Yeah, I was just going to say it also shows her education, right?
It does Bachelor of Arts in Marketing and then a dedicated skills section with both hard skills and soft skills.
Nice.
Social media marketing, Google Analytics, and her language proficiency, English and French.
So it's really helpful to kind of see it all in action.
Absolutely. It helps solidify those concepts.
Yes. Okay, so to bring this all home for you, our listener,
Yeah.
what's the key takeaway when it comes to writing a truly effective resume in English?
I think it boils down to clarity, relevance, and professionalism.
Yeah, I like that.
Your resume needs to be easy to read.
Right.
It needs to clearly demonstrate how your skills and experience align with the specific job.
Yes.
And it needs to present you as a polished, detail-oriented, credible candidate.
Absolutely. And just to reiterate some of those action steps, remember to proofread. Meticulously tailor your resume to each job. Use those strong, impactful action verbs to really bring your experience to life.
And don't hesitate to seek feedback.
Oh yeah, that's huge.
Ask a native speaker, a friend, a colleague, a career advisor to review it.
Fresh eyes can really help.
Absolutely. They can often spot errors or suggest improvements that you might have missed.
Such great advice. So as you're thinking about your own, the specific skills and experiences that make your professional journey unique, how can you articulate those in a way that's going to immediately grab the attention of a potential employer so that your resume rises right to the top of that stack?
That's a great question.
That's your food for thought today.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
We'll see you next time.
See ya.
Bye.
Job interviews, right. They can be a bit of a nail-biter for anyone, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
But think about this for a second. What if English isn't your first language? That adds like a whole other level of challenge to the mix.
It does, yeah.
And I bet some of you listening know exactly what I'm talking about. So today we're going to dive into this guide. It's all about helping English learners navigate the world of job interviews.
Sounds good.
And what's really cool about this guide is, well, it's not just about the language itself, it's about understanding what interviewers are really looking for, how to showcase your skills in the best possible light, and just feeling confident overall, presenting yourself professionally.
Right, makes sense.
And what I liked is how this guide breaks everything down. Like those common interview questions everyone gets a little nervous about. It gives you concrete examples of how to answer them. Plus, it has these helpful tips sprinkled throughout, so it's structured to take away that feeling of where do I even start?
Yeah, that's a good point.
So our mission today is to really pick out the most useful stuff from this guide, give you actionable strategies and make it all relatable,
Definitely.
Think of this as a shortcut to understanding the key elements so you can walk into your next English job interview feeling a lot more prepared.
And confident.
Right, exactly.
And I think it's important to emphasize this right off the bat. Preparation is your best friend, especially when English isn't your native language.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not just about knowing tons of fancy English words. It's about organizing your thoughts, being clear, getting your ideas across, even with simpler phrasing.
Oh, that's so true.
That shows employers you're serious, that you've got it together even under pressure.
Okay, so let's jump into some common questions, shall we?
Yeah, let's do it.
We got to start with the classic. Tell me about yourself.
Of course.
It seems simple enough on the surface, right?
Right, yeah.
Just talk about yourself, but what's the interviewer really after?
It's not an invitation to tell your whole life story, that's for sure.
No, definitely not.
They want a quick snapshot. Who are you, professionally speaking? What have you done?
Okay.
And most importantly, why should they care? Why are you a good fit for this particular job?
Good point.
It's about showing them you can connect your experience to the job at hand. And, for you, it's also a chance to show you can be concise.
Yeah.
Keep it brief, even in a second language.
Yeah.
Shows you respect their time, highlights your language skills.
I get it. And the guide has some really clear tips for this one. Keep it simple. Keep it professional. No need to go way back to childhood.
Right.
Focus on relevant education, work experience, skills you picked up along the way. And this is important, and by showing you're genuinely excited about this specific role.
Absolutely. That final touch is key. You're not just looking for any job. You want this job.
Yeah. And they give a great example from Maria from Brazil.
Oh, yeah.
She talks about her background in business administration, her experience as a sales assistant, customer interaction, problem solving, teamwork, organization, all those skills. Then she explains she moved to the US to improve her English and find new opportunities.
Darn.
And she connects this directly to the job, saying she loves helping people, thrives in a busy environment.
Perfect. Yeah.
You see how it all ties together. Concise, hits all the important points, directly relevant to the job, and they have a great practice tip.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
Keep your answer to 4 to 6 sentences. Practice saying it out loud. It'll make it feel natural and build your confidence.
Really good advice. Repetition is key. So next up, what are your strengths? This is your time to shine.
Absolutely. But you got to be strategic, right?
Yes.
What do you think they're really getting at with this question?
Well, they want to know what you're good at, obviously. But more importantly, do those strengths match what they're looking for in the job description? It's all about relevance.
Yeah, makes sense.
And the guide stresses using clear, simple words. Hardworking, friendly, good at learning. You don't need super complicated vocabulary. What's crucial is giving an example for each strength.
So you're not just saying it, you're showing it.
Exactly. And they give two great examples. One person says they're hardworking, then tells a story about their restaurant job.
Staying late, helping with cleaning, prepping food, getting praised for reliability. I like it.
Right. And the other example is about being good at learning quickly. That person talks about mastering a new cashier machine in just a week.
Wow, impressive. So those stories really bring your strengths to life.
They do. And here's a practice tip. Think of 2 or 3 strengths that are relevant to the job. Then, prepare a short story or example for each one. Show, don't just tell.
All right, strengths checked. Now, for the question everyone dreads a little.
Uh-oh, which one?
What are your weaknesses? It feels like a trap, doesn't it?
It can, yeah, but it doesn't have to be. What they're really assessing is your self-awareness. Are you honest? Can you identify areas where you need to improve? And crucially for you, are you doing something about it?
So they're not looking for perfection, they're looking for growth.
Exactly. And the guy gives some smart tips here. Choose a real weakness, but not one that's critical to the job. Don't highlight something that'll make them doubt you can do the work.
Good point.
And the key is to explain how you're actively working to improve that weakness. That shows you're proactive, you want to grow.
Makes you look good. And the examples they give are really helpful. One person mentions getting nervous speaking in front of people.
Relatable.
But then they explain they're practicing their English, joining conversation groups, and their confidence is growing. Another example is about someone who takes too long trying to be perfect.
That's me sometimes.
But they're learning to manage their time better, making schedules, sticking to them.
Very practical. So it's all about owning your weaknesses and showing you're taking steps to address them.
Exactly. Pick a weakness that's not super serious. Practice explaining how you're improving. It shows you're reflective, you're committed to learning.
Good stuff. Now let's talk about the why do you want this job question. This is where your research on the company comes in.
Oh yeah, big time.
What do you think they're trying to find out here?
Well, first of all, did you actually bother to learn about the company?
Right.
Do you actually care about this specific job, or are you just applying everywhere? And do your skills and goals match what they're offering?
Spot on. It's all about showing them you're a good fit, that you've done your homework.
Exactly. So the guide highlights the importance of mentioning something specific about the company, their mission, their values, maybe a recent accomplishment. And then you connect your skills and experience to the job description.
Show them you've thought about it.
Right. And the example they give talks about someone who enjoys working with people, and they know the company has a good reputation for customer service. They also connect their previous customer-facing experience with their desire to grow and learn.
Making that connection is so important. So basically, you're telling them this job aligns perfectly with what I'm good at and what I want to achieve.
Precisely. And here's a great tip. Research the company online. Find one specific positive thing that resonates with you, something you can genuinely mention in your answer.
Shows you've put in the effort.
Exactly. Okay, now let's fast forward a bit. Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
The future.
What are they trying to get at with this one?
I think they want to see your ambition. What are your long-term goals? Is this job just a stepping stone, or are you looking to stay with the company?
Yeah, they're looking for potential signs of commitment.
Right. And the guide advises keeping it positive, job-related. Don't mention any plans to leave anytime soon.
Right, don't scare them off.
The example they give focuses on wanting to progress within the company, maybe becoming a team leader. It also highlights their commitment to learning, contributing to the company's growth, and valuing long-term employment.
So you're basically saying, I want to grow with you.
Exactly. And for you, the practice tip is to think of a realistic career goal. Explain why it's important to you and try to connect it to opportunities within the company.
So show them how your future goals align with their company's growth.
Exactly. Now, there's a type of question called a behavioral question. They use these to see how you've handled things in the past.
Oh yeah, like what?
A common one is, can you tell me about a time you solved a problem? So how do you tackle this?
Well, the guide suggests a really helpful method called STAR, S-T-A-R.
Okay, break that down for me.
It stands for situation, task, action, result. First, you describe the situation, then the task that needed to be done. Next, you explain the specific actions you took, and finally, you talk about the result. It's like telling a mini story.
So you're walking them through your problem-solving process.
Right. They want to see your skills in action. And they give a really good example. It's about someone working in a coffee shop that ran out of cups during a morning rush.
Oh, that's a nightmare scenario.
Right. So the situation is no cups, lots of customers. The task is keeping everyone happy.
Yeah, good luck with that.
The action is calling another store for more cups, and in the meantime, offering free cookies to customers who have to wait. The result is they get the cups, everyone's happy.
Nice save.
Right. So the practice tip here is to think of a problem you solved, whether at work, school, even in your personal life. Then structure your answer using STAR.
So you're prepared to tell a clear, compelling story. Okay, stress. It's a part of every job.
It is.
So the question, how do you handle stress, is pretty common. What do you think they're looking for here?
They want to know you can handle pressure, that you have healthy ways to cope, that you won't fall apart when things get tough.
Right. They want to know you can stay calm and still do your job.
Exactly. So the guide recommends having a simple, practical coping strategy, something like taking deep breaths, making a to-do list,
Good ideas.
and then give a brief example of how you've used it. The example they give talks about deep breathing and list making, and then the person describes how they stayed calm during a crazy busy day by focusing on one task at a time.
Makes sense. Breaking it down helps manage stress.
Absolutely. So the practice tip for you is to identify a relaxation technique that you actually use and practice explaining it.
Okay, we're nearing the end of the interview, and there's one question that almost always comes up.
You mean, do you have any questions for us?
That's the one. Now, what's the golden rule here?
Say yes. Always have questions. Not having any makes you look uninterested.
Exactly. It's your chance to show you're curious, that you've been paying attention, and that you're genuinely interested in the role and the company.
It's your turn to interview them a little bit.
Right. And the guide recommends asking about the job itself, the team, the company culture. But avoid talking about salary or benefits at this stage.
Too early for that.
Right. Some good examples they give are, what do you enjoy most about working here? What's a typical day like in this role? And what kind of learning opportunities are there for new employees?
Those are good ones. They show you're thinking about the day-to-day reality of the job.
They do. So the practice tip is to prepare 2 or 3 questions beforehand. That way you're not caught off guard and can ask them confidently.
Good advice.
Now, beyond the common questions, the guide also has some extra tips specifically for English learners.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about those.
What stood out to you?
Well, first off, practice, practice, practice.
Can't emphasize that enough.
They recommend reading your answers out loud multiple times, like 5 to 10 times each. Even record yourself so you can hear how you sound.
It's like giving yourself feedback. You can catch any mistakes and improve your pronunciation.
Exactly. Another big one is using clear, simple language.
So important.
It's better to communicate clearly with simple words and correct grammar than to try and use fancy words you're not totally comfortable with.
Clarity over complexity every time.
And another tip, slow down when you speak.
Especially in a stressful situation like an interview.
Right, it's easy to rush when you're nervous. But speaking slower gives the interviewer time to understand you, and it gives you time to think.
Don't forget to smile.
Oh yes, a smile goes a long way.
It makes you seem friendly, approachable, confident, even if you're feeling butterflies inside.
It does. And the guide gives some useful phrases to memorize. Things like, can you repeat that, please? I'm sorry, I don't understand. Could you explain? Oh, and a polite, thank you for this opportunity.
Those are lifesavers. Having those ready can really smooth out any communication bumps.
Absolutely. They even include a sample interview. It shows an interviewer and a candidate named Ahmed.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
It's a good way to see how these questions and answers flow in a real conversation. Ahmed's answers are short, relevant, and they show off his skills and interest in the job.
It's a helpful illustration. You don't need to give long, complicated answers to impress them. Just be clear, concise, and genuine.
Exactly. So we've covered a lot. What are the big takeaways from this guide, especially for English learning listeners?
All right, let's recap. Preparation is key, right?
Absolutely. Number 1.
Then, focus on communicating clearly, even if it means using simpler language. And always show genuine interest in the job and the company.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And this guide gives a really solid foundation for tackling those interview questions.
It does, and I think it's important to remember that job interviews are a learning experience. Every interview, whether you get the job or not, helps you practice your communication skills and improve your technique.
That's a really good point. It's all about growth. And hey, for those of you listening, think about which questions make you the most nervous.
Yeah.
Maybe those are the ones you should focus on practicing. And we wish you the best of luck in your next interview.
Good luck, everyone. All right, so you're here with us on the deep dive, and you know why you're here. It's because you want to get ahead professionally, and that communication, It's everything.
It really is. And, sometimes it can feel like you need a whole other degree just to navigate all the nuances of office talk.
Yeah, exactly. But that's where this deep dive comes in.
Right. We're all about giving you the tools and insights to really level up your communication game without feeling overwhelmed.
And the material you've given us today is a perfect starting point.
It is. Office Conversations, 100 Common Phrases in English.
This is a great resource. It's more than just a list of phrases.
Right, it's like a practical guidebook. Right?
Exactly. To help you navigate those everyday office interactions smoothly, confidently, and without, second-guessing yourself all the time.
Totally. And our mission today is to go beyond just the surface level of these phrases. We want to unpack the real why behind them.
Right. What makes them effective? How can understanding the underlying principles make you a more powerful communicator? Exactly. Because ultimately, it's about building stronger connections, right?
Absolutely. And ultimately feeling more in control and confident in your everyday interactions.
All right, so let's kick things off with those all-important first impressions. Greetings and small talk.
Oh, yeah. Those little moments that can actually make a big difference.
They really can. I mean, we all know how to say good morning, right? But what's the impact when someone asks, how's your day going? And actually means it.
Right. It's that little bit of extra effort that shows you're actually present and engaged.
It shifts the whole tone. The text highlights phrases like, good morning, how's your day going? And how was your weekend? It seems so simple.
Yeah. But think about it. It's about building social capital. There's small deposits of positive connection that really add up over time.
Totally. Like little investments in your relationship.
Exactly. And even just a brief positive acknowledgement in return can make a difference. It was great, thanks, or pretty good, how about you? It reinforces that connection.
Creates that back and forth that kind of greases the wheels of interaction, right?
Absolutely. It contributes to a more positive, collaborative atmosphere.
Okay, so we've made a good first impression. Now let's say we're diving into a task and we hit a snag.
Yeah.
We need help. We need clarification. This is where knowing how to ask the right questions is crucial.
So crucial. And, sometimes it can feel a little awkward to ask for help, right? But being able to do it clearly and confidently is actually a sign of strength.
Totally. It shows you're not afraid to acknowledge when you don't know something.
Right. And that you're open to learning and collaborating.
The text gives us some really solid phrases here, like, can you help me with this?
Simple, straightforward, but very effective. It gets the point across without being demanding or, putting anyone on the spot.
And I love the phrase, could you explain this to me? It shows a real willingness to learn.
Definitely. And it invites the other person to share their knowledge, which people generally appreciate.
I also find, I'm not sure I understand. Can you clarify? Super helpful.
Oh, me too. It puts the responsibility on you for understanding right, but it doesn't sound accusatory at all.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, hey, I want to make sure we're on the same page.
And that kind of clarity can prevent so many problems down the line.
Right. It's funny, thinking back on my early career, I was so hesitant to ask questions. I thought it made me look incompetent.
I think a lot of people feel that way, but you know what? Being able to ask for help effectively is actually a hallmark of a good team player.
It really is. It shows you're not afraid to reach out when you need support.
And you're contributing to a more efficient workflow overall. I mean, when you get the clarification you need up front, you're much less likely to make mistakes or waste time going down the wrong path.
Makes sense. And on the flip side, being willing to offer help is just as important.
Oh, absolutely. It's about fostering that same supportive environment that we were just talking about.
So phrases like, do you need any help with that?
Yes. So simple, but it goes a long way. It shows you're paying attention to your colleagues' workloads.
And that you're invested in their success, too.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be a big formal offer either.
Right. Sometimes just a casual, let me know if you need assistance, or I'm happy to pitch in, can make a world of difference.
It really can. And you know what? Offering help can actually benefit you in the long run, too.
How so?
Well, it strengthens relationships, right? And those connections can be invaluable when you need support down the line. It's a kind of reciprocal altruism,
I like that. Reciprocal altruism.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move into a territory where things can get a little more delicate. Agreeing and disagreeing.
Yes. The art of navigating differing opinions, crucial in any workplace.
Essential for healthy debate and collaboration.
Right. And this is where diplomatic communication is key. Phrases like, I agree with you, and that's a great idea. They validate the other person's input. They build consensus.
They make people feel heard and respected.
Exactly. And, sometimes it's easy to just jump in with our own opinions, but taking a moment to acknowledge the other person's perspective first can make a huge difference.
It really can. And of course, there are times when we need to disagree, and that's where things can get tricky.
For sure. But it's all about how you do it.
Right. Instead of just saying, I disagree, what are some more constructive ways to approach it?
Well, the text suggests starting with something like, I'm not sure I agree. It's softer,
It opens up the conversation rather than shutting it down.
Right. And then you can follow up with something like, I see your point, but...
That but. It's all on the but.
It is. It acknowledges their perspective while still allowing you to introduce your own.
And what about when you're really stuck in a disagreement? How do you move towards resolution?
Well, I love the phrase, let's find a middle ground.
That's a good one. It shifts the focus from being right or wrong to finding a solution that works for everyone.
Exactly. It's collaborative problem solving at its best.
Okay, so let's talk about the heart of most workplaces. Tasks and deadlines.
The bread and butter.
Yes. And clear communication in this area is absolutely essential.
Couldn't agree more. It keeps projects on track and minimizes stress for everyone involved.
Definitely. So let's break it down. First things first, understanding deadlines.
Right. Asking, when's the deadline for this? It seems obvious, but, sometimes we get caught up in the details and forget to clarify that crucial piece of information.
It happens. And once you know the deadline, it's about making clear commitments and providing updates along the way.
Absolutely. So phrases like, I'll get this done by tomorrow, that gives your colleagues a concrete time frame to work with.
And it shows you're reliable. And what about when things get a little dicey and you might need to adjust a deadline?
Well, then you need to know how to ask, can we push the deadline back? But just as importantly, you need to provide context. Why do you need more time? What's the new proposed timeline?
Right. It's not just about asking. It's about offering solutions too. And then there are those proactive updates. I'm working on it right now. It's almost finished.
Those little check-ins can go a long way in building trust and preventing misunderstandings.
They show you're on top of things. And, you think about it, clear communication about tasks and deadlines really boils down to reducing ambiguity.
It does. When everyone is on the same page, there are fewer surprises, fewer miscommunications, and a much greater sense of shared responsibility.
Okay, so let's step into the arena that often gets a bad rap. Meetings.
Yes. Meetings. They can be productive or they can be a black hole of time.
It really depends on how they're run and how people communicate within them.
Absolutely. So let's talk about how to make meetings more effective, starting with how we initiate and participate.
Right. So instead of everyone sort of awkwardly shuffling in and waiting for someone to take charge, why not just be direct and say, can we start the meeting now?
Great point. It sets a tone of efficiency right from the start.
And then once you're underway, what's on the agenda today? It's a simple question, but it ensures everyone's on the same page about the meeting's purpose.
And it allows people to mentally prepare to contribute relevantly.
Now, when it comes to contributing to the discussion, I always appreciate it when people say something like, can I add something here?
Me too. It shows you're engaged, but you're also respectful of the flow of the conversation.
And then sometimes you need to guide the conversation to stay on track, right?
Absolutely. So phrases like, let's move on to the next topic, can be really helpful for keeping things moving.
And of course, we all have busy schedules, so being mindful of everyone's time is key.
So true. So knowing how to politely wrap things up with a, can we wrap this up, can be a lifesaver.
It shows you respect everyone's time. And, when you really break it down, using these kinds of phrases in meetings is about creating a structure.
It is. It's about fostering a more inclusive and efficient environment where everyone has the opportunity to contribute and decisions can be made effectively.
And hopefully everyone walks out feeling like their time was well spent.
Exactly. All right, so we've covered in-person interactions, but let's not forget about those crucial virtual exchanges, email and phone communication.
Oh, yeah. These days, so much of our work happens in the digital realm.
It really does. And just like with in-person interactions, there's a certain etiquette and set of phrases that can really make a difference in terms of clarity and professionalism.
Absolutely. So let's start with email. One phrase I use all the time is, I'll send you an email about this.
Oh, that's a good one. It sets a clear expectation for follow-up.
And it prevents things from getting lost in the shuffle of conversations.
Right. And if you need to make sure something is documented or you want to avoid any misunderstandings, can you put that in writing? Is a great way to go.
It's polite, but it also ensures clarity.
And creates a record of the agreement or decision.
Okay, so let's shift to the phone. What are some of your go-to phrases for phone communication?
Well, if I want to have a more in-depth conversation, I often say, "I'll call you later to discuss."
Yeah, that's a standard professional way to propose a longer conversation.
Right. And when you need someone to take action, "Could you follow up on this?" is a good way to delegate responsibility, clearly.
And of course, there are times when you don't have an answer right away.
In those cases, "I'll get back to you soon" manages expectations and lets the other person know you haven't forgotten about their request.
So all these phrases for email and phone communication, it's really about building professional credibility, right?
Absolutely. It's about conveying a sense of clarity, responsibility, and respect for the other person's time.
Okay, so let's talk about something that can really boost morale and create a more positive work environment. Compliments and encouragement.
Yes. Recognizing and acknowledging good work is so important.
It's fuel for the soul.
It really is. And those little words of affirmation can have a huge impact on motivation and job satisfaction.
Absolutely. So let's start with the classics. Great job on this. You nailed it.
Straightforward, enthusiastic, and they get the point across immediately.
And sometimes it's about offering ongoing encouragement, right? So phrases like, "You're doing really well," or "Keep up the good work." They let people know their efforts are being noticed and appreciated.
Exactly. And those little nudges can make a big difference in someone's day. And when you want to make feedback even more impactful, try highlighting a specific instance of strong performance.
So instead of just saying, "Good job," you could say, "That presentation was impressive. You really engaged the audience."
Perfect. Specific and genuine.
And when we think about why compliments and encouragement are so effective, it really comes down to human psychology.
It does. We all have that innate need for recognition and validation, right? And when those needs are met, it creates a more positive and productive work environment.
Now, of course, we all know that things don't always go smoothly in the workplace. So let's talk about how to handle problems constructively.
Yes. Turning those inevitable bumps in the road into opportunities for growth.
Exactly. And it all starts with communication.
Right. So how do we bring up problems in a way that's clear but also solution-focused?
Well, the text suggests starting with something like, "There's a problem with this."
It's direct, but it doesn't sound accusatory.
Right. It just states the fact. And then you can move towards solutions with phrases like, "Can we fix this quickly?" or "I'll look into it."
Those are good ones. They show you're proactive and you're taking ownership of the situation.
And I also love the phrase, "Let's figure this out together."
Yes. It invites collaboration and reinforces that sense of teamwork.
And sometimes a little reassurance can go a long way in these situations.
So true. A phrase like, "It's not a big deal, we can sort it out," can help de-escalate anxiety and maintain a positive perspective.
It's about fostering a culture of resilience.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from greetings to problem solving, but all conversations eventually come to an end. So let's talk about how to close them gracefully and leave a good, lasting impression.
It's all about those final touches that solidify the interaction.
Exactly. So sometimes the simplest phrases are the best. "I'll let you get back to work."
It's polite, it's considerate, it acknowledges their time and responsibilities.
And then you can add a little personal touch with a friendly sign-off. "See you tomorrow. Take care. Have a great day."
Those little bits of warmth go a long way.
And they do. And if you want to keep the door open for future interaction, "Let's catch up later" is always a good option.
It shows you're interested in continuing the conversation.
And it strengthens those connections. And it's funny how these seemingly insignificant closing remarks can actually contribute to your overall professional image.
They really can. It's about reinforcing the positive aspects of the interaction and leaving the other person with a good feeling.
And speaking of continuing the conversation, the source text you provided also includes a fantastic bonus section with another 50 common phrases.
Oh yeah. We don't have time to delve into all of them, but it's worth highlighting that this expanded list offers even more nuanced language for all sorts of workplace scenarios.
It does. You'll find phrases for brainstorming like, "Let's brainstorm some ideas."
Phrases for managing your workload like, "It's on my to-do list."
And phrases for ensuring follow-up like, "Can we circle back to this?"
It's like a treasure trove of communication gems.
It really is. It encourages a mindset of continuous improvement.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the key takeaway is that mastering these everyday English phrases can have a huge impact on your effectiveness and confidence in the workplace.
I agree. It's about recognizing the power of language and using it strategically to build stronger connections, navigate challenges, and achieve your goals.
It's about those small adjustments that can lead to big results.
Absolutely. So here's my final thought for you. Start paying attention to the language used by the really effective communicators in your own workplace.
The people who seem to navigate interactions effortlessly.
Exactly. Notice how they use these kinds of phrases, and don't be afraid to try them out in your own conversations.
You might be surprised by the positive ripple effects.
You really might.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it valuable.
It's been a pleasure.
And remember, small changes in your language can lead to big changes in your career.
So true.
All right, that's it for today. Until next time, keep diving deep and keep communicating effectively.
We'll see you then.
Bye for now.
You know, I think we've all been there, right? That moment when you realize, okay, I've got to give this presentation in English. Maybe it's to colleagues from around the world. Maybe it's to really get a grasp on all the research coming out in English in your field. Or maybe you just know that being able to present well in English is a seriously valuable skill to have.
It is. And it's something that a lot of people want to get better at. It can feel intimidating, though, especially if English isn't your native language.
Totally. So what we're going to do in this deep dive is go way beyond just, basic tips. We want you to come away from this feeling like you've got the tools and the knowledge to actually feel confident and in control when you're presenting in English.
Right. We've got a fantastic resource to help us do just that. We're going to be looking at a really comprehensive guide that's been put together specifically for English learners who need to give presentations.
Perfect. So our mission today is to pull out the most practical, immediately useful stuff from this guide. We're talking about everything from figuring out exactly why you're giving a presentation in the first place to nailing that Q&A session at the end, which can sometimes feel a bit scary.
Absolutely. By the end of this deep dive, you'll have a solid framework, something you can actually use to prepare for and deliver your next English presentation with, hopefully, a lot less stress and a lot more confidence.
So let's jump right in. And the guide starts off by asking a really fundamental question. Why are you giving this presentation? It seems simple, but it's so important.
It is, because that why is going to shape pretty much every decision you make about the presentation. The guide highlights 4 main goals that a presentation might have. It could be to inform your audience, to share new knowledge or data or insights.
Right. So think like a university lecture or maybe presenting research findings at a conference.
Exactly. Or your goal might be to persuade, to convince your audience to adopt a certain point of view, or maybe to invest in a project or an idea. This is super common in business context, right?
Oh, yeah. Like pitching a new product or proposing a change in strategy.
Now, this next goal is a bit less common in formal presentations, but it's still worth mentioning. It's to entertain. Think about a presentation at a company event or maybe a talk at a community gathering.
Right, where the main aim is to engage people and make them enjoy the experience.
And then the final goal that the guide mentions is to demonstrate. So this might involve showing how something works, explaining a process step by step.
Yeah, like a software demo or teaching someone a new technique.
And it really highlights how recognizing your primary goal, that why behind your presentation, is going to shape everything that follows. The structure, the content, even your delivery.
And it makes so much sense when you think about it in your own situation, right? It's like, okay, if I'm giving a presentation to my team about a new project, my goal is definitely going to be to persuade them that this project is worth doing.
Precisely. Or if you're presenting the findings of a research study, your primary goal is likely to inform your audience about what you discovered.
Okay, so we've thought about our goal. What else do we need to keep in mind in those early stages?
The guide emphasizes that you also need to think carefully about your audience. Who are you speaking to? What's their level of knowledge about the topic already? Are they experts? Students?
Right, because that's going to determine how much background information you need to give, how technical you can get with your language.
Exactly. You wouldn't use the same language and tone when presenting to a group of specialists as you would when presenting to a general audience. And on a practical level, you need to factor in how much time you have. Is this a 10-minute presentation or an hour-long lecture?
Okay, so we've got the goal, we've considered the audience, we've looked at the time we've got. What comes next?
The structure, right.
Exactly. And the guide advocates for that classic 3-part structure. Introduction, main body, conclusion. It's like the foundation of a good presentation, like a good story even, beginning, middle, and end. Makes sense. So how does that break down in terms of time?
The guide suggests aiming for a split that's roughly like this. 10% of your time for the introduction, 80% for the main body, and then 10% for the conclusion. Obviously, this is just a general guideline, but it gives you a good sense of proportion.
All right, so let's break those sections down in more detail, starting with the introduction. What are the absolute must-haves for a strong opening?
The guide breaks down the introduction to 4 key components, and it makes it really clear and actionable, which is great. So first up, you've got the greeting. This is where you acknowledge your audience, make them feel welcome.
Simple but important, sets the tone, right?
Exactly. Then, it's all about you. A brief introduction of yourself. Let people know who you are, what your role is, why you're the one standing up there talking about this topic.
Okay, so we've welcomed everyone, we've introduced ourselves. What's next?
Now it's time to really lay it out. You need to clearly state the topic of your presentation. What are you going to be talking about? What's the main focus?
Right. And to tie it back to what we were talking about earlier, it's also essential to state the purpose of your presentation. Are you here to inform, to persuade, to entertain, or to demonstrate? Making that crystal clear for your audience right from the start is really helpful.
Absolutely. And then finally, to round off the introduction, you should provide a brief outline of the main points you're going to cover. This helps your audience follow along and know what to expect.
It's like giving them a roadmap for the presentation. Here's where we're going, and here's how we're going to get there.
Exactly. And the best part is, the guide even provides some really practical starter phrases for each of these components. It's like having a toolbox of useful language right at your fingertips.
Okay, let's hear some examples. What kind of phrases are we talking about?
Well, for the greeting, it suggests things like, "Good morning, afternoon, everyone." Nice and straightforward. Then, for introducing yourself, you could say something like, "My name is your name, and today I'm going to be talking about..."
And to state your purpose, you could use a phrase like, "The purpose of my presentation is to..." And then to outline the main points, something like, "I've divided my talk into 3 parts. First, we'll look at, second, we'll explore, and finally, we'll consider."
And to illustrate this even more clearly, the guide provides an example of a complete introduction on the topic of renewable energy. It's presented by someone named Anna, and it goes like this. "Good morning, everyone. My name is Anna, and today I'm going to talk about renewable energy. The purpose of my presentation is to discuss the importance of renewable energy for our future. I've divided my talk into 3 parts. First, we'll look at what renewable energy is. Second, we'll explore the benefits of using renewable energy sources. And finally, we'll consider how we can incorporate renewable energy into our daily lives."
That's a great example. Clear, concise, hits all the key points, and it's really helpful to see it all put together like that.
It is. It gives you a clear template that you can adapt to your own topic.
Okay, so the introduction is done. We've set the stage, we've introduced ourselves and the topic. Now it's time to dive into the main body of the presentation. This is where the real meat of the content is, right?
Absolutely. The main body is where you present your key arguments, your evidence, your examples, everything that supports your main message. And the guide really emphasizes that each point you make needs to be clear, concise, and supported by solid evidence.
This is where your research comes in, where you bring in data, case studies, real-world examples, whatever is most relevant to your topic and your audience.
Exactly. And to help you structure the main body effectively, the guide suggests using transition phrases to guide your audience smoothly from one point to the next.
I like that. It's like signposting for your listeners.
It is. And the guide provides some really useful examples like, "Let's start by looking at," or "moving on to my next point."
Or another important aspect to consider is...
Right. And then when you're bringing in those examples to back up your points, you can use phrases like, "for instance," or "to illustrate this further."
These phrases are so helpful for making those connections in your presentation and ensuring that your audience can follow your train of thought.
And to continue with that renewable energy example, the main body of the presentation might discuss different types of renewable energy sources like solar power, wind power, and hydropower. And then, to illustrate the concept of solar power, the presenter might show a picture of solar panels and explain how they convert sunlight into electricity.
It's about making those abstract concepts more concrete and relatable, using those real-world examples.
Exactly. It helps people visualize what you're talking about and grasp the key ideas more easily.
All right, so we've laid out our key arguments in the main body, we've supported them with evidence, and now it's time for the final act, the conclusion.
The conclusion is all about bringing everything together, leaving your audience with a clear understanding of your main points.
And it's your last chance to really drive home your message, right?
It is. And the guide highlights 3 key things to do in your conclusion. First, summarize your main points. Briefly restate the most important things you want your audience to remember. This helps reinforce those takeaways.
And then depending on the goal of your presentation, you might want to offer a final thought, a call to action, or something to leave the audience pondering.
Precisely. If your goal is to persuade, this is your last chance to encourage your audience to take action. If your goal was to inform, you might end with a thought-provoking question or suggestion for further research.
And of course, it's essential to thank your audience for their time and attention. It's just good manners.
It really is. And it also brings a sense of closure to the presentation. And then, to open up the floor for discussion, you can invite questions from the audience. This shows that you're open to engagement and that you value their input.
And once again, the guide provides some really helpful phrases for all of this. For summarizing, you could start with something like, to summarize the main points, or, in conclusion, we've seen that.
And then to thank your audience, a simple thank you for your attention is always appropriate.
And to invite questions, you could say, now, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
And if we go back to that renewable energy example, the conclusion might sound something like this. To sum up, renewable energy offers a sustainable, environmentally responsible, and increasingly affordable alternative to traditional fossil fuels. I encourage you to explore ways to incorporate solar, wind, or other forms of renewable energy into your own lives. Thank you for your time, and now I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
So that brings us to the end of the structure section. But the guide doesn't stop there. It goes on to provide a whole section of really useful phrases that you can use in your presentations.
It's like having a toolkit of pre-made building blocks for effective communication, and the guide categorizes them by function, which is so handy for finding exactly what you need quickly.
Okay, let's go through some of the key categories. So for starting your presentation, we've already touched on some of the phrases, but the guide also suggests things like, let's begin by, or I'd like to start by.
And then, for transitioning between different parts of your presentation, you could use phrases like, now let's turn our attention to, or next I'd like to discuss. These are great for guiding your audience and helping them follow your train of thought.
And when you need to give an example to illustrate a point, you can use phrases like, for instance, or to illustrate this point further.
And if you want to emphasize a particular point, you might use phrases like, it's crucial to remember that, or I'd like to highlight.
And then for wrapping up your presentation, we've already mentioned some options, but the guide also suggests phrases like, before I conclude, I'd like to briefly recap, or that brings me to the end of my presentation. Having these phrases at your fingertips can really help you to structure your presentation and deliver it more smoothly.
It's like having a script for those key moments. It can really boost your confidence.
Okay, so we've covered the structure, we've looked at some useful phrases. Now let's tackle a big one, pronunciation. This is something that a lot of English learners worry about, especially when it comes to presenting.
It is, and the guide acknowledges this right from the start. It normalizes those feelings of anxiety, which is really helpful in itself, but then it goes on to offer some really practical advice for improving your pronunciation and your overall fluency.
So, what are some of the key tips? Because I think we can all relate to feeling a bit self-conscious about our pronunciation sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. The guide suggests starting with the basics. Practice, practice, practice. Identify the words that you find tricky and focus on getting those right. The guide even mentions a couple of common examples like the words statistics and specific.
Oh yeah, those are definitely tongue twisters. And I think recording yourself speaking can be really helpful, even though it can feel a bit awkward at first.
It is, but it's such a valuable tool for identifying areas where you can improve. You might be surprised at what you hear.
I know I am. And another tip that the guide suggests is using tongue twisters to practice your articulation and fluency. You know that classic one, she sells seashells by the seashore.
That's the one. It sounds silly, but it really does help train your mouth muscles.
And the guide even includes a specific exercise for practicing the word presentation. It suggests breaking it down into its syllables, presentation, and then practicing saying it slowly at first and gradually increasing your speed.
It's a great technique for really getting comfortable with the sounds and the rhythm of the word.
Okay, so pronunciation is one area where people often feel anxious. Another one is visual aids. Slides, diagrams, charts, those sorts of things. They can be so helpful in a presentation, but they can also be a source of stress.
And that's why the guide dedicates a whole section to using visual aids effectively. It starts by highlighting just how powerful they can be when used well. They can really enhance your message and make your presentation more engaging.
Absolutely. A good visual can really help to clarify a complex concept or bring data to life.
Exactly. But the key is to use them strategically, not just for the sake of it. And the guide provides some really solid tips for designing effective slides.
What kind of tips?
Well, first and foremost, keep it simple. Less is more when it comes to slides. You don't want to overwhelm your audience with too much text or too many visuals. Stick to bullet points for your key information and avoid using lengthy paragraphs.
It's easy to get carried away and try to cram everything onto your slides, but the guide really stresses the importance of white space and visual clarity.
It makes such a difference for your audience. And when it comes to visuals, choose images and graphs that are relevant to your topic and that help to clarify your points.
Right, and the guide actually gives a really nice example of a slide structure for a presentation about the benefits of renewable energy.
Yeah, it's really straightforward and effective.
Yeah.
The title of the slide is simply Benefits of Renewable Energy. And then underneath, there are 3 clear bullet points: reduces pollution, long-term cost savings, and job creation.
Perfect. It's clean, concise, and it communicates the key information without being overwhelming.
Exactly. And remember, your slides are there to support you, not to be the main event.
Okay, so we've covered structure, phrases, pronunciation, and visual aids. Let's talk about something that probably affects every presenter at some point: nerves. Even seasoned speakers get nervous before a presentation. It's totally normal.
Absolutely. And the guide does a great job of normalizing those feelings of anxiety. It acknowledges that it's something that almost everyone experiences, and then it provides some really practical tips for managing those nerves and building your confidence.
What are some of the strategies it recommends?
Well, one of the simplest and most effective techniques is deep breathing. Taking some slow, deep breaths before you start can help to calm your nervous system and reduce those feelings of anxiety.
It's amazing how much of a difference that can make.
It really is. Another helpful strategy is to practice your presentation beforehand. You can do this in front of a mirror or with friends or family. The more familiar you are with the material, the more confident you'll feel when you're actually delivering it.
Rehearsal is always a good idea.
Always. And then there's a tip that might sound a bit cliche, but it can actually be really helpful. Focus on your message. Instead of getting caught up in your own anxiety, try to shift your attention to what you want to communicate to your audience.
Right. It's about getting out of your own head and focusing on connecting with your listeners.
Exactly. And the guide even includes a little affirmation that you can repeat to yourself to boost your confidence. It goes, "I am well prepared and I can deliver this presentation effectively."
It sounds a bit cheesy, I know, but positive self-talk can be surprisingly powerful.
It can. It's all about framing your mindset in a positive way.
Okay, so you've prepared your presentation, you've practiced it, you've taken some deep breaths, you've reminded yourself that you've got this. Now you're at the end, and it's time for the Q&A. This can be a tricky part for a lot of people, especially when they're presenting in a language that isn't their first language.
It can be, but it's also a valuable opportunity to engage directly with your audience and to address their specific questions or concerns. And the guide gives some really helpful tips for handling the Q&A effectively.
What kind of tips?
Well, it starts with some basic strategies for responding to questions. If you understand the question clearly, you can acknowledge it and then provide your answer. The guide suggests using phrases like, "That's a great question, the answer is."
Straightforward and to the point.
Exactly. But if you didn't quite catch the question, or if you're not sure what the person is asking, don't be afraid to ask them to repeat or clarify. The guide suggests saying something like, "Could you please repeat that?" Or, "I'm not sure I understand your question. Could you rephrase it, please?"
It's always better to ask for clarification than to try and answer a question you don't fully understand.
Absolutely. And if you genuinely don't know the answer to a question, it's perfectly okay to admit that.
Yeah.
You can say something like, "That's a really interesting question. I don't have that information right now, but I'd be happy to look into it and get back to you."
Honesty and transparency go a long way in a Q&A.
They do. And to illustrate these strategies, the guide gives a little example scenario where someone in the audience asks a question about the cost of installing solar panels. The presenter acknowledges that it's a valid concern and then provides a balanced answer that addresses both the upfront costs and the long-term savings.
It's a great example of how to handle a potentially tricky question with confidence and clarity.
Exactly. And the guide stresses that it's always better to be honest and upfront than to try to bluff your way through a question you don't know the answer to.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from understanding your purpose to structuring your presentation, from pronunciation tips to handling the Q&A. And to help you put all of this into practice, the guide includes some exercises at the end.
These exercises are designed to help you solidify your understanding and to actually practice using these techniques. And they're really well thought out.
Okay, so what kind of exercises are we talking about?
Well, the first one is all about practicing that all-important introduction. Remember those key elements we discussed: greeting, introducing yourself, stating your topic and purpose, outlining your main points.
Yes, those are crucial for setting the stage and engaging your audience right from the start.
Exactly. So this exercise provides a template with placeholders for you to fill in with your own information. It's a great way to get comfortable with those opening lines.
And it can be really helpful to write it out and practice saying it out loud a few times until it feels natural and comfortable.
Absolutely. And the second exercise is a bit more involved. It challenges you to create a short presentation on a specific topic. In this case, it's healthy eating.
Okay, healthy eating. That's a topic that everyone can relate to.
Exactly. And the exercise provides a clear three-part structure for the presentation. First, you need to explain the importance of healthy eating. Then you offer some practical tips for maintaining a balanced diet. And finally, you suggest some easy and healthy recipe ideas.
So it walks you through the entire process from start to finish.
It does, and it's a great way to practice putting all of these techniques together in a real-world context. You get to practice structuring your presentation, using transition phrases, incorporating visual aids if you want to.
And it's on a topic that's familiar and relatable, so you can focus on the delivery and the language without having to worry too much about the content itself.
Exactly. It's all about building that confidence and fluency.
All right, so we're almost at the end of our deep dive into this fantastic guide for giving presentations in English. And to wrap things up, the guide offers some final tips for success. And I really appreciate that these are all very actionable things you can actually do.
They are, and the guide emphasizes that, above all, practice is key. The more you practice giving presentations in English, the more comfortable and confident you'll become.
It's a skill just like anything else.
Exactly. It takes time and effort to develop. But the guide also reminds us that it's important to speak slowly and clearly, especially when you're presenting in a language that isn't your native language.
It's tempting to rush when you're nervous, but taking your time and enunciating clearly will make it much easier for your audience to understand you.
It will. And the guide encourages presenters to engage with their audience, make eye contact, use natural gestures.
That connection with your listeners can make all the difference.
It really can. And finally, the guide reminds us to be prepared for questions. Anticipate what your audience might ask and have some answers ready.
Even if you don't know the answer to every question, being prepared to handle those questions calmly and confidently will make you a much more effective presenter.
Absolutely. So there you have it. A comprehensive guide to giving presentations in English, packed with practical tips and actionable strategies.
I think we've covered a lot of really valuable ground here, and hopefully you're feeling a lot more equipped and empowered to tackle your next English presentation.
Remember, giving presentations in English is a skill that you can develop and improve over time. You've now got a solid foundation. You know how to structure your presentation, you've got some useful phrases in your toolbox, and you've got some strategies for dealing with those common challenges.
And as you move forward, try to apply these principles not just to formal presentations, but to any situation where you need to communicate clearly and confidently in English. Maybe think back to a past presentation and consider how you might approach it differently now. Or perhaps you have an upcoming presentation that you can start preparing for with these new tools in mind.
The most important thing is to keep practicing and to keep learning. And remember, you've got this. Okay, so welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at something we all deal with, right? This whole idea of when to use formal English like business English and when to just relax and go casual.
Yeah, it's tricky.
Like, how do we make those choices, and are we even aware of them? So we found this really awesome guide for English learners, and it's got all these insights about why being able to switch between these two, like business English and casual English, why that's such a powerful skill to have.
It really is. I mean, think about it. It's not just about, proper grammar and all that. It's more like strategic communication,
Totally, yeah.
Yeah.
We want to give everyone listening a real toolkit, right? Like, how do you actually make those subtle shifts in your language depending on who you're talking to and what you're trying to get across?
Exactly. And this guide, it breaks down so many interesting things. Like, it's not just about vocabulary, right? It's about, like, how politeness works differently, how you structure your sentences, even your tone of voice.
Yeah, all that plays into it.
Yeah. By the end of this deep dive, you'll be way more aware of how to fine-tune your communication, for different people and situations.
Awesome, I like it. All right, so let's just jump right in. Business English, right?
Yeah.
What is it really about? I mean, we all know it's supposed to be formal and professional, but what's the heart of it?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. It's the language of, workplaces. Think emails, those presentations that make everyone nervous, meetings, all that. And the big thing is it needs to be super clear, respectful, kind of keeping a certain distance.
Right.
You want to make sure everyone gets your message, no matter who they are or how well you know them.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
So business English is all about being polite, sometimes even being indirect to kind of soften things,
Okay.
and using really structured sentences, grammatically correct, all that, so there's no room for misunderstanding. And the tone is generally pretty neutral.
Okay.
You don't want to sound too emotional or biased.
Makes sense.
And there's some things you actually try to avoid in business English, like slang, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And those super casual phrases that maybe not everyone understands, especially if English isn't their first language. And you also avoid getting too personal, keep those boundaries clear.
Yeah, definitely. It's about creating that level playing field where everyone feels comfortable and respected. And I guess on the flip side, that's where casual English comes in, right? What makes it so different?
So casual English is all about, connecting with people, being relaxed and informal. It's what you use with, your friends, your family, maybe close colleagues when you're outside of work.
Okay. Yep.
And the rules are much looser, Slang is totally fine, contractions are everywhere, and the tone is just like warmer, friendlier. You can even be funny and crack jokes,
Yeah.
The goal here is not to be perfectly grammatically correct, but to build rapport, to make everyone feel comfortable and like they belong in the group.
I love that. It's like, thinking about clothes, right? Business English is that tailored suit you wear for a specific purpose.
Yeah.
And casual English is like your favorite comfy sweater.
Exactly.
They both have their place,
Right.
So for our listeners, why is it so important to be able to switch between these two?
It's huge. Imagine you're in a really important business meeting.
Right.
And you're trying to negotiate a deal, but you're using super casual language.
Ooh, yeah.
It might make you sound less credible, less professional. Right?
Yeah, not good.
But then let's say you're working closely with your team on a creative project and you're being all stiff and formal. It can kind of stifle the creativity, make people uncomfortable sharing their ideas.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's not just about avoiding awkward situations or sounding correct. It's about being socially smart.
Okay.
Being able to adapt your language helps you navigate all sorts of situations, build stronger relationships, and get what you want more effectively.
I like it, yeah. Okay, let's get into some specifics. Vocabulary is a big one, right? I mean, even something as simple as choosing between assist and help can make a difference, can't it?
Yeah, it's subtle but powerful.
Right.
Assist sounds more professional, like you're providing support in a specific role,
Mm-hmm.
whereas help is more general, more everyday. Of
Okay.
I would be happy to assist you with your project.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds way more formal than I'll help you with your project, no problem.
Yeah, totally.
Right. And same with inquire versus ask. Inquire shows you're taking the request for information seriously.
Right. It's more respectful.
Exactly. And think about commence versus start. Commence sets a more formal, official tone, like you're kicking off something important.
Yeah.
And conclude is similar. It adds that sense of finality that you might want in a business setting.
That makes sense.
It's about choosing words that create the right impression,
Yeah, totally. It's not about sounding smart. It's about choosing words that fit the context.
Exactly. It's like, setting the stage with your language.
Okay, so politeness. This guide really emphasizes how important it is in business English. Why is it such a big deal?
Politeness is key in a professional setting, especially when, there's a hierarchy or when you have to deliver some not so great news.
Right, you don't want to step on anyone's toes.
Yeah, and you want to keep things running smoothly.
Okay.
So business English uses a lot of indirect language, to kind of soften the blow. Things like, would you mind, or could you please? Instead of just saying like, do this or give me that, it shows respect for the other person's time and effort.
Totally. And even modal verbs, right?
Oh,
like
sure.
would, could, may. Those all make things sound less demanding and more collaborative.
They make a huge difference. Like saying, could you please send me the report, gives the other person more agency than just saying, send me the report.
Yeah, I see that.
And same with, I would appreciate it if you could review this document. It sounds more like a request than an order.
So the goal is to make the other person feel like they're part of the process, not just someone taking orders.
Okay, yeah, I get it. This guide also had some great examples of how politeness plays out in different situations. Like asking for an update on a project, right?
Yeah.
You could say, could you please provide an update by tomorrow? Which is super polite and respectful.
Right.
Or you could say, can you let me know what's up by tomorrow? Which is more casual and direct.
Yeah, I mean, both are fine, depending on who you're talking to.
Exactly, yeah. And for inviting someone to a meeting, you could say, I would be grateful if you could attend the meeting, which is very formal.
Very polite, very formal.
It'd be great if you could come to the meeting, which is more relaxed.
Yeah, it just depends on the context. Yeah.
Right. Okay, what about sentence structure? How does that come into play?
So business English often uses these longer, more complex sentences.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It can sound kind of intimidating at first, but it actually helps to convey information really clearly and precisely.
You're using all those dependent clauses and connecting words to really spell everything out and avoid ambiguity.
Makes sense.
Like, let's say you're writing about a project that's facing some challenges.
Right.
You could say something like, although the project is facing certain logistical challenges, we remain confident in its successful completion by the established deadline.
Yeah.
It's a mouthful, but it covers all the bases, right?
It does, yeah.
Casual English, on the other hand, tends to use shorter, simpler sentences.
Oh, yeah.
Getting straight to the point. Like, in that same situation, you might just say, the project's tough, but we'll get it done.
Right, exactly.
It's less formal, but it still gets the message across.
Yeah, for sure. I liked how the guide had those examples about apologizing for a delay.
Yeah, those are good.
Like the formal version was, we apologize for the inconvenience caused by the delay. And then the casual one was, sorry about the holdup.
So much shorter, right.
Yeah.
And it uses that casual phrase, hold up.
Right, exactly. And there was another good one about asking for help.
Yeah.
The formal way was, should you require further assistance, please do not hesitate to contact me.
Very formal.
Very formal, yeah. And the casual one was, if you need more help, just hit me up.
Yeah, that's like inviting them to reach out anytime.
Yeah, totally different vibe, right?
Completely.
Okay, let's talk about tone. I feel like tone is so important, but it can be hard to pin down.
Oh, yeah, it's subtle.
Right.
But it makes a huge difference. In business English, you generally want to keep things neutral, right?
Why is that?
You're aiming for objectivity, You don't want to sound too emotional or let your personal feelings get in the way. It's especially important when you're delivering news, whether it's good or bad. You want to make sure the message is clear and that people don't misinterpret it.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you have to, let someone go, you might say something like, we regret to inform you of the termination of your contract.
Right.
It's direct, but it avoids any personal feelings.
Okay.
Casual English, though, is all about expressing emotions.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, you might say, bummer, your application didn't make it. It shows empathy in a way that wouldn't be appropriate in a business setting.
Yeah, that makes sense. The guide had some good examples of this, too.
Yeah, like with thanking someone for a quick response. The formal way was, we appreciate your prompt response to this issue.
Right.
And the casual way was, wow, thanks for getting back to me so fast.
Yeah, much more enthusiastic.
Like you're genuinely excited.
Exactly, yeah. And there was another one about a delay.
Oh, yeah.
The formal version was, the delay is unfortunate, and we're addressing it.
Keeping it neutral.
Yeah, very neutral. And the casual one was, this delay sucks, but we're fixing it.
Right, much more emotional.
Yeah. Okay, last but not least, contractions.
Yeah, those little guys.
They're everywhere in casual English, but we tend to avoid them in business English, right?
Yeah, in formal business English, especially in writing, it's generally better to avoid contractions. Like use do not instead of don't, I am instead of I'm.
Right, makes it sound more serious.
Exactly. It creates that tone of formality and professionalism, which is important for things like legal documents or official reports.
Mm-hmm.
But in less formal business situations, like, chatting with colleagues, contractions are totally fine.
Yeah.
It makes you sound more approachable and relatable. And in casual English, well, contractions are just natural, right?
They are, yeah. It's how we actually speak.
It's how we speak. It makes the language flow more smoothly and creates that sense of ease and informality.
I see that. So like in a business email, you might say, we do not foresee any issues. But in a casual chat, you'd probably say, we don't foresee any issues.
Exactly. And there was that example in the guide about getting approval.
Right.
The formal way was, we are unable to proceed without your approval.
Very formal.
And the casual way was, we can't move forward without your okay.
Yeah, much more relaxed.
Yeah.
And then there was that one about informing someone of changes.
Formal. I'm writing to inform you of the changes. Casual. I'm letting you know about the updates.
And then the last one was about a response to a proposal.
Yeah.
Formal. They have not yet responded to the proposal. Casual. They haven't gotten back about the proposal yet.
That's more conversational. Right.
Yeah, totally. Wow, this has been so insightful. It's amazing how many subtle things go into choosing the right language, isn't it?
It's incredible. Language is so powerful.
Yeah.
And, we use it all the time without even thinking about it.
That's true.
But when you start to pay attention to these details, you realize how much of an impact they can have.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so for our listeners, let's make this really practical. Okay, like how can you actually apply all this stuff in your everyday life?
Okay, so first off, practice switching between those two styles,
Okay, how do you do that?
Take like a formal email you wrote and try rewriting it as a casual message to a friend, and then do the opposite. Take a casual message and make it formal. That will really help you see the differences.
Makes sense.
And pay attention to how people use language in different situations, like watch a business meeting or listen to a professional podcast and notice their vocabulary, their tone, how they structure their sentences. And then do the same with your friends, your family. See how they talk.
Okay, yeah.
And always think about who you're talking to and what you're trying to achieve.
Right.
Like, what's the purpose of your communication? That should guide your choice of language.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I guess, constantly learning new words, both formal and informal, that helps too, right?
Huge, yeah. The more words you know, the more choices you have.
Okay.
And the more precisely you can express yourself.
Yeah. And if you're ever unsure, what's the best approach?
When in doubt, start with clear, neutral language.
Okay.
You can always adjust from there, based on how the other person responds and how the conversation is going.
Right. So the big takeaway here is that being able to switch between business and casual English is a superpower.
Right. It is. It helps you connect with people, build relationships, get your point across more effectively.
And achieve your goals.
Exactly. It's about understanding those unwritten rules of communication and using them to your advantage.
Yeah. It's not just about being right or wrong. It's about being effective.
Exactly.
So to wrap things up, I have one last thought for you, our listener.
Okay.
The next time you're talking to someone in English, whether it's a work email or just chatting with a friend, pay attention to how formal or casual you're being. Think about your word choices, your tone, how you're structuring your sentences.
Yeah.
And see if you can make some small changes, to better fit the situation.
It's fascinating how much of a difference those small tweaks can make.
Yeah, I think so too.
You might be surprised how much smoother your interactions become and how much better you can connect with people.
It's all about finding that right balance, isn't it?
It is.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive today. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me.
Take care.
You too. Okay, so have you ever noticed how much of our lives actually involve negotiation?
Yeah, it's everywhere, isn't it?
It really is. Big things, small things, it doesn't matter. Salary talks, buying a car, even just deciding where to go for dinner.
Oh, totally. That last one can be the toughest negotiation sometimes, honestly.
Yeah.
Especially with the different tastes and all.
Right. And then imagine trying to do all that in English when it's not your native language. Talk about adding another layer of complexity.
Oh, for sure. It's not just about the words themselves. It's the whole cultural dance around them, knowing what to say, when to say it, how to say it.
It can be a minefield, really. And that's exactly why we're diving deep today into the world of English negotiation. We've got this super detailed guide here, packed with insights and strategies. So our mission basically is to break it all down for you, make it clear, and hopefully give you a solid foundation for navigating these tricky situations.
Absolutely. We'll be covering a lot of ground, the basics of what negotiation actually is, the key vocabulary and phrases you'll need, the different stages of the process, those little communication tricks that can make all the difference.
Oh, and don't forget the cultural side of things. How different approaches might clash or surprisingly work in your favor. And of course, we'll be looking at real-life examples, practical stuff you can actually use.
Right. Because at the end of the day, it's about being able to walk into these situations, whether it's a business deal or just asking for what you want and feeling confident,
Exactly. So while we're going through all this, I want you to think back to a time when you maybe struggled with a negotiation in English. What tripped you up? Was it the language, the cultural aspect, or something else entirely? Keep that in mind, because understanding those hurdles is the first step to overcoming them.
Okay, so first things first, let's define negotiation. What are we actually talking about here?
Well, simply put, it's a discussion aimed at reaching an agreement. Pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah, on the surface. But the guide actually breaks it down into 4 key steps: preparation, discussion, bargaining, and agreement. Each one plays a crucial role in getting to that final handshake. Metaphorically speaking, of course.
Right. And before we even get into those steps, the guide lays out some really important principles to keep in mind throughout the entire process.
Yeah, those foundations, they make all the difference.
Exactly. So first up, we have the win-win approach. Now, this doesn't mean everyone gets everything they want. That's rarely realistic, right?
Definitely not. It's more about understanding that a good negotiation isn't a zero-sum game. It's not about one person winning and the other losing.
Right. It's about finding that sweet spot where both parties feel they've gained something valuable, that the agreement benefits them both.
Exactly. Because ultimately, a deal built on mutual benefit, it's more likely to stick. It's more sustainable and strengthens relationships in the long run.
Which makes perfect sense in both business and personal contexts. And speaking of understanding the other side, that leads us to the next principle: active listening.
Ah, yes, this one. Way more than just, waiting for your turn to talk.
It really is an art, isn't it? Truly hearing what the other person is saying, not just the words, but also the, unspoken needs and concerns behind them.
It involves giving your full attention, comprehending the message, and then responding in a thoughtful way. And remembering the key points, of course.
Because, let's be honest, sometimes we're so focused on what we're going to say next that we miss crucial details.
All the time. But when you actively listen, you're not just absorbing information, you're building trust and understanding. And that's key to finding those win-win solutions we were talking about.
Then we have confidence. This one, I think, can be especially tricky when English isn't your first language. It's easy to feel unsure of yourself, even when you know what you want.
It's a common struggle, for sure. And it can really undermine your position in a negotiation. But the guide stresses that confidence isn't about being aggressive or pushy.
Right. It's about being clear, assertive, and expressing your needs and boundaries respectfully, but firmly.
Preparation is key here. When you've done your homework, when you know your worth and have strong arguments to back up your position, that confidence shines through naturally.
Exactly. And then finally, we have flexibility. Because, let's face it, things rarely go exactly according to plan, right?
Oh, never. In negotiation, being willing to adapt, to consider alternatives, that's crucial.
Because clinging rigidly to your initial stance, that can lead to a deadlock pretty quickly.
It can. Being flexible means being open to compromise, to finding creative solutions that might not have been on the table initially, but still meet the core needs of both parties.
So we've laid out the fundamental principles. Now let's talk language. Because, as the guide points out, knowing the right words and phrases can make a huge difference in how effectively you can negotiate in English.
It's like having the right tools for the job. You wouldn't try to build a house with just a hammer, right?
Exactly. So the guide starts by introducing some general negotiation terms. These are essential to understand, like the basic building blocks of the conversation.
So first up, we have an offer. This is your initial proposal, your starting point.
Then we have a counteroffer, which is the other party's response, proposing their terms, which may or may not align with your initial offer.
Then there's compromise, which is where both sides give a little to reach an agreement that works for everyone.
And sometimes, despite everyone's best efforts, you might hit a deadlock. That's when you just can't seem to find common ground, at least not at that moment.
And then there's a concept of bargaining power. This is your ability to influence the outcome of the negotiation.
Now, this isn't always about like formal authority or position. It can also come from having more information, more options, or simply a better understanding of the situation.
Exactly. It's about leverage. And the guide then moves on to provide a bunch of super useful phrases, categorized by the different stages of a negotiation.
It's like a cheat sheet for navigating those tricky conversations.
It really is. So let's start with starting the negotiation. How do you open that conversation effectively?
Well, the guide suggests phrases like, I'd like to discuss the terms of,
Which is clear, direct, gets straight to the point. You can also opt for a more collaborative tone with something like, let's find a solution that works for both of us.
right, and expressing confidence in reaching a positive outcome can also set the right tone. Something like, I believe we can reach a fair agreement.
Now, once you've set the stage, it's time to put your cards on the table, so to speak. It's time for making an offer.
So how do you go about that in a way that's clear but also leaves room for negotiation?
A straightforward statement like, we propose, can work well. Or you could phrase it as a question like, how about? Which sounds a little less forceful, more open to discussion.
And if you want to signal that you're pretty firm on your position, you could use, our best offer is. But be careful with this one.
Yes, using best offer too early in the game can limit your flexibility later on.
Now, of course, you'll likely be receiving offers in return, and they might not always align with what you were hoping for. So how do you go about responding to offers constructively, especially when you need to push back?
Well, you could say something like, that's a bit lower than we expected. Could you go higher? Which is polite, but clearly signals your disappointment.
Or, I appreciate your offer, but we were thinking more along the lines of, this softens the rejection a bit while still stating your desired range.
And if the offer is close, but you need to tweak some details, you could say, that sounds reasonable, but can we discuss? This opens the door for further negotiation on specific points.
Okay, so now we get to the heart of it, the bargaining stage. This is where the real give and take happens.
This is where those active listening skills really come into play. Understanding their offers, responding clearly, and looking for those win-win compromises.
So what are some key phrases for navigating this crucial stage?
Well, to explore flexibility, you could ask, is there any flexibility on the price?
And to suggest meeting in the middle, you could say, what if we meet halfway? A classic compromise tactic.
And to keep the conversation flowing and explore alternatives, you might say, would you consider?
And then hopefully all that back and forth leads to the moment of truth, closing the deal. What are some phrases that signal you're ready to finalize things?
Expressing satisfaction with, I think we've reached a fair agreement, is a good way to indicate you're happy with where things landed.
Or a more action-oriented phrase like, let's finalize the details to get the ball rolling.
And a simple, clear confirmation like, I'm happy with these terms, leaves no room for ambiguity.
But of course, not all negotiations are smooth sailing. Sometimes disagreements are inevitable. So how do you go about handling disagreements constructively?
Well, acknowledging their perspective is crucial, even if you don't agree. You could say something like, I understand your point, but have you considered?
Right. You're showing respect, but also subtly introducing another idea. You could also suggest a shift in perspective with, let's look at this from another angle. This can help break a stalemate.
And to reinforce the collaborative spirit, you could say, perhaps we can find a middle ground.
This whole section on useful phrases, it really is a goldmine. But now let's move on to the stages of a negotiation. The guide outlines 5 key stages, and we briefly touched on them earlier, but let's dive a bit deeper.
Stage 1, the foundation upon which everything else rests, is preparation. And honestly, I think this is where people often falter. They jump into a negotiation without really thinking it through.
Right. They might know what they want, but they haven't considered the other side's perspective, their needs, their motivations, and that can be a critical misstep.
Totally. Preparation means doing your research, understanding the market, the industry standards, the other party's potential position. It also means knowing your limits, your walkaway point. What's the absolute minimum or maximum you're willing to accept?
Right, because if you don't know your boundaries, you're more likely to get pushed into a deal that doesn't actually serve you.
Exactly. And this preparation, it feeds into your confidence. The more prepared you are, the more self-assured you'll feel going into the negotiation. And that confidence can be a game changer.
Okay, so after you've done all that groundwork, you move into stage 2, opening the discussion. This is your first impression, so setting the right tone is crucial.
It really is. This stage is about establishing rapport, being clear about your goals, but also being respectful of the other party. The guide gives a great example. Thank you for meeting with me. I'd like to discuss my salary based on my experience and contributions.
It's professional, direct, and sets the agenda without being confrontational. Then we get to stage 3, which is often the most dynamic part of the process, bargaining.
This is where those offers and counter-offers fly back and forth, and those persuasive language skills we talked about really come into play.
It's about understanding their offers, articulating your responses clearly, and looking for those areas of potential compromise. Remember that salary negotiation example we talked about?
The one where the employer starts with an offer of $50,000 and the candidate counters with $55,000, politely asking, would that be possible?
Exactly. It's assertive, but also open to discussion. Now, assuming all goes well, that bargaining leads to stage 4. Closing the deal. What's essential here?
Well, clarity is paramount. You want to ensure both parties are on the same page, summarize the agreed upon terms, confirm the next steps, maybe even put it all in writing.
This prevents misunderstandings later on. And the example in the guide where they agree on a salary of $53,000 with specific benefits and then follow up with a confirmation email, that's a great illustration of closing the deal cleanly.
Couldn't agree more. And then finally, we have stage 5, which is often overlooked but still important, follow-up.
What does that involve beyond just basic courtesy?
It's about making sure that all commitments are met. If there's a contract, ensure both sides are adhering to the terms. If it was a verbal agreement, follow through on any promised actions. This builds trust and reinforces the positive relationship you've hopefully established.
Okay, so we've gone through the stages. Now let's shift gears and focus on some specific communication techniques that can really elevate your negotiation game. The guide calls them effective communication techniques. And first up, we have active listening, which we discussed earlier as a general principle. But how do you actually put it into practice during a negotiation?
Well, using phrases like, I see your point, or I understand where you're coming from, shows that you're actively processing their words. It validates their perspective.
And asking clarifying questions is another way to show you're engaged and want to ensure you're understanding them correctly.
Things like, could you explain that further? Or, so if I understand correctly, you're saying. It's not just about nodding along, it's about showing genuine interest and making sure you're both on the same page.
Right, and that can make a huge difference in building rapport and trust. Now, the guide also emphasizes the importance of polite but firm language. This can be a delicate balance, especially when you're navigating cultural nuances and potentially feeling a bit less confident in English.
It is. It's about being direct and clear about your needs, but also being respectful of the other party. So instead of a blunt, no, that's unacceptable, you might say, I'm afraid that doesn't quite work for us.
Or instead of, your price is too high, you could try, we were hoping for something closer to. You're still communicating your position, but in a more diplomatic way.
Exactly. And then there's the technique of using conditional sentences. These can be really helpful in finding compromises and exploring potential solutions.
Those if-then constructions.
Exactly. For example, you could say, if you could offer a longer payment period, then we would be willing to increase our initial offer. It links a concession on your side to a desired outcome from theirs.
It creates a sense of give and take, which is essential in negotiation. And finally, we have nonverbal communication. It's easy to get so focused on the words that we forget about the power of body language.
No, absolutely. Maintaining appropriate eye contact shows sincerity and engagement.
A confident posture can reinforce your assertiveness. And even simple things like nodding to show understanding can make a difference.
It's all about being aware of your nonverbal cues and how they might be interpreted, both consciously and subconsciously. Now, we can't talk about negotiation in English without addressing the elephant in the room, or rather, the globe in the room. Cultural considerations.
Because the way people negotiate, it varies so much across different cultures. What's considered acceptable or effective in one context might be totally inappropriate in another.
Absolutely. And the guide provides some really helpful insights into this. It highlights that Western cultures, particularly in the US and the UK, tend to be more direct in their communication, value efficiency, and aim to reach agreements relatively quickly.
Whereas in many Asian cultures, like in Japan or China, building strong relationships and trust is paramount. The negotiation itself might be more indirect, with a greater emphasis on harmony and saving face.
And then you have cultures like in the Middle East, where bargaining is often an expected and even enjoyable part of the process. Negotiations can take longer as relationships are built and offers are carefully considered.
So the takeaway here, as the guide emphasizes, is to do your research. Learn about the cultural norms of the people you'll be negotiating with. Even a basic understanding of the communication style, their values, and their approach to decision-making can make a world of difference.
It can. It helps you build rapport, avoid misunderstandings, and ultimately negotiate more effectively. And this applies even in local contexts. Think about it. Even within your own city, you're likely interacting with people from diverse cultural backgrounds.
Right, so that cultural awareness, it's a valuable tool, not just for international business deals, but for everyday interactions as well. Now, to really bring all this to life, the guide provides some common negotiation scenarios with examples. I always find these super helpful for seeing how these principles and phrases actually play out in real situations.
It's one thing to know the theory, but seeing it in action, that's where the real learning happens. So let's start with salary negotiation. This one's always a bit nerve-wracking, isn't it?
It can be. So in this scenario, the employer kicks things off with an offer of $45,000. The candidate then counters with a polite but firm counteroffer of around $50,000, justifying it based on their experience and industry standards.
And they don't just throw out a number. They ask, is there any flexibility? Which opens the door for further discussion. The employer then comes back with a revised offer of $48,000, along with the promise of a performance review in 6 months. And in the end, they reach an agreement.
It's a great example of that back and forth process, that dance of offers and counteroffers that ultimately leads to a mutually beneficial outcome.
It is. And it shows the importance of being prepared, knowing your worth, but also being willing to compromise. Now, let's look at a different scenario. Price negotiation. This time in the context of buying a car.
Oh, this one can be a real battle of wills sometimes. So, in the guide's example, the seller starts at $15,000. The buyer, armed with research on comparable models, counters with a lower offer.
And they don't just lowball. They provide a justification for their offer, which adds credibility.
Right. And eventually, they reach a compromise closer to the middle, around $14,000. But then the buyer skillfully negotiates for an added benefit, a 1-year warranty. It shows that negotiation isn't just about price, it can also be about securing additional value.
Absolutely. And finally, we have a business contract negotiation, where the focus is on project timelines.
Deadlines, always a point of contention.
In this example, the client wants the project completed in 2 months. But the service provider, knowing the scope of work, suggests a more realistic time frame of 3 months.
And instead of just digging their heels in, they explore alternative solutions. They propose a phased delivery approach where the most critical parts of the project are delivered first.
And they ultimately agree on a 6-week time frame for that first phase, which addresses the client's urgency while also ensuring the provider can deliver quality work.
It's a great example of how flexibility and creative problem solving can lead to a win-win, even when the initial demands seem incompatible. So those were just 3 examples, but they really highlight how the different stages, the vocabulary, and the communication techniques we've discussed all come together in real-life negotiations.
And to wrap things up, the guide provides some essential tips for successful negotiation in English. These are like the golden nuggets of wisdom, based on experience and research.
So let's go through them. First up, and this might seem obvious, but it's worth repeating, practice.
Practice those common phrases, those responses to offers, ways to express agreement or disagreement. The more familiar you are with the language, the more confident you'll feel in the moment.
It's like rehearsing for a play. The more you practice, the smoother your performance will be on opening night. And speaking of staying calm, that's another crucial tip. Even if the negotiation gets heated, try to maintain your composure.
Because getting emotional, it rarely helps. It can cloud your judgment and make it harder to think clearly. So take a deep breath, stay calm, and remember to be polite, even when you're pushing back.
And one of the most empowering pieces of advice the guide gives is to be prepared to walk away.
Knowing your limits, knowing when to say no, that's crucial. Because if you're not willing to walk away, you're more likely to accept a deal that's not in your best interest.
And then there's the power of silence. The guide mentions using silence strategically. This might feel awkward at first, especially if you're from a culture where silence is uncomfortable.
But sometimes, after you've made an offer, a well-placed pause can be more effective than words. It gives the other party time to consider your proposal without feeling pressured.
And finally, and this is so important, confirm all agreements in writing.
Get it down on paper or in an email or a text, whatever works. This prevents misunderstandings later on and ensures everyone's on the same page.
So, as we bring this deep dive to a close, it's clear that while negotiating in English can be challenging, it's by no means impossible.
With the right tools and strategies, you can approach these situations with confidence and achieve successful outcomes. It's about understanding the principles, mastering the language, and being mindful of those all-important cultural considerations.
And always remember, negotiation is a skill that can be learned and honed with practice. The more you do it, the better you'll get. So as you go about your day, think about the negotiations, big and small, that you encounter. What could you do differently? How could you apply these principles and techniques to achieve more favorable outcomes?
And think about the cultural dynamics at play. How might your approach need to adapt based on the person you're interacting with? We'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences. And if you're interested in exploring more advanced negotiation tactics, or maybe delving into specific scenarios in more detail, let us know. We're always open to suggestions for future deep dives.
Until then, happy negotiating.
Ever get that feeling? Like you're trying to get something sorted out with, a company or whatever, and it's like, how that whole conversation goes in English can either like totally fix the problem or just make you even more frustrated.
Oh, yeah. Totally.
We're diving deep into that today.
Yeah.
We've got this really cool resource. It's called a comprehensive guide for English learners.
Okay.
We're going to pull out the good stuff, the important parts to help you navigate all those customer service situations in English.
Right.
With confidence.
Right.
Doesn't matter if it's for work or, just everyday life. The goal is to give you actual tools and a good understanding without, making it too complicated.
Sounds good.
Let's jump in.
Okay, let's do it.
So I think it all starts with the basics.
Yeah, for sure.
This guide really makes it clear that politeness and professionalism and just speaking clearly, those aren't just, nice things to have. They're really the foundation of any good customer service interaction.
Absolutely. You can think about them as the cornerstones, upon which good customer service interactions are built.
Right. So when you're first making contact with somebody, whether it's in person or on the phone, those first couple of words can really set the tone.
For sure.
So this guide has some key ways to greet someone.
Okay.
A really straightforward, hello, how can I help you today?
Yeah.
That's always a good start. But you can make it a bit more formal, if you're in a specific setting.
Yeah.
Something like, good morning, afternoon, evening, welcome to company name.
Okay.
That works really well. And for phone calls, a really good opening is, thank you for calling company name. My name is your name. How may I assist you?
Yeah.
It covers all the bases right away.
Yeah.
What I find interesting is how these phrases immediately show you're there to help.
Right. Exactly. And that's what you want.
Yeah.
You want to make sure the customer knows that you're there to help them. And, it puts the customer at ease.
Right.
Knowing that they've connected with somebody who's ready to help.
Exactly.
And then after that initial contact, you've got to get the right information.
Yeah.
You need to understand their needs.
Makes sense. You can't really help if you don't know what the problem is.
Exactly.
So the guide gives some really nice ways to ask for those details.
Okay.
If it's about an order, you could say, could you please provide your order number?
Right.
Which is really clear and direct. If you just need to know who you're talking to, may I have your name, please?
Yeah.
It's standard, polite.
Yeah.
To get to the heart of it, you could ask, can you describe the issue you're facing?
Oh, okay.
This lets the customer actually explain,
Yeah.
what's going on.
Right.
What I really like about these is that they're all phrased as requests. It shows respect.
Oh, for sure. It makes a huge difference in how the customer feels.
Yeah.
And then you have to reassure them that you're there to help. So phrases like, I'd be happy to assist you with that. Or let me check that for you.
Yeah.
One moment, please, while I look into this.
Yeah.
They're all great.
Yeah.
Why do you think it's so important to actually say that you need a moment rather than just going silent?
Oh, that's a good point. I think it's about, keeping the customer involved.
Yes.
And letting them know that you respect their time. Silence can almost feel like you've disappeared or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Or you're not paying attention.
Right.
So saying one moment is like a reassurance that you're still working on it.
Yeah, I like that.
The guide gives us some really good examples, real world examples of how these phrases work.
Oh, cool. Like what?
So let's say a customer says, I need help with my recent order.
Okay.
A good response would be, of course. Could you please share your order number so I can assist you better?
Yeah, I like that. It validates their request and then immediately gets to the next step.
Yeah, it's that combo of empathy and clear direction
Totally.
that seems to be like the key. Another example, I can't log into my account.
Oh, yeah.
The agent can say, I'm sorry to hear that. Let me help you reset your password. May I have your email address? Again, you're acknowledging their frustration,
Right.
offering a solution, and then asking for a specific piece of info you need to move forward.
Yeah, it's a really good flow.
Yeah.
It builds trust from the beginning.
Exactly.
Just by using polite language, stating your intention to help, and efficiently gathering the information that you need.
Yeah, it creates a really good experience for the customer.
Yeah, for sure.
Now let's talk about phone conversations specifically. The guide points out that there are some, special things about talking on the phone
Yeah.
where you don't have like those visual cues to rely on.
Right, exactly. Clear speech and active listening.
Yeah.
Those are even more important on the phone.
Mhm.
You really have to make sure that your voice is easy to understand and that you're paying really close attention, even without, body language.
Right. So how you answer that phone is really important. The guide gives a couple of strong options here.
Okay.
One is, thank you for calling company name. This is your name. How may I assist you? Which is very professional and informative.
Yeah.
And then a slightly shorter version, especially if it's a specific department, is, hello, you've reached department. How can I help you today?
Okay.
Both options identify the company or the department and offer assistance right away.
Yeah.
They're really good.
I like that. It helps the customer know that they've reached the right place.
Exactly.
And then, of course, there are going to be times when you need to transfer the call
Yeah,
to a different person or a different department.
definitely.
And doing this smoothly is so important.
Yeah, for sure. You don't want to just click a button and they're suddenly talking to someone else.
Exactly.
So the guide suggests phrases like, let me connect you to the right department. Please hold for a moment.
Okay.
That clearly tells them what you're doing.
Yeah.
And it also asks for their patience. And if you know exactly who they need to talk to, you can say, I'll transfer your call to name department. One moment, please.
Yeah.
That's even more specific.
Yeah. And I think what makes these phrases better than just saying, hold on, is that they are informative and they are respectful of the customer's time.
Yeah. Hold on. It just sounds kind of rude.
It does. It really does.
It doesn't tell them what's going on.
Yeah.
But by saying you're connecting them to the right department or to a specific person, it reassures them that you're actually doing something to help.
Exactly. It shows you're taking action.
Yeah.
You're not just leaving them hanging.
Right, exactly. And then there's putting someone on hold.
Oh, yeah.
Nobody likes to be put on hold.
Right.
But it's sometimes necessary.
Yeah.
So the guide suggests asking, do you mind holding for a minute while I check this for you? It shows consideration because you're actually asking for their permission.
Yeah.
And then when you come back to the call, a simple, thank you for waiting, I appreciate your patience, goes a long way.
Yeah, I agree. Those small things
Yeah.
where you're acknowledging that they've been waiting can really change the customer's whole feeling about the interaction.
Right. It shows that you're aware of their time.
Exactly.
The guide has some common scenarios for phone calls where these phrases can be used.
Oh, perfect. Like what?
So let's say someone calls and says, I'd like to speak to someone about my billing issue.
Okay.
A good response would be, certainly. Let me transfer you to our billing department.
Okay.
Please hold for a moment.
Perfect.
It's clear, it's direct, and it manages expectations.
Yeah.
They know they're going to be transferred. Another one is, let's say the customer asks, how long will the delivery take? The agent could say, let me check the status for you. Do you mind holding for a minute?
Yeah, that's good. You're explaining why they're on hold.
Yeah.
And you're stating the action that you're taking.
Exactly.
Very nice.
What I think is really interesting about all these phone-specific phrases is that they're all about keeping that conversation flowing smoothly,
Yeah.
even when you don't have those visual cues.
Exactly.
So it's all about being clear, being polite, and keeping the customer informed.
For sure.
Now, let's switch gears a bit and talk about written communication,
Okay.
like email and live chat. So, as the guide says, even though you lose that vocal tone,
Yeah.
it's really important to keep a professional but also friendly tone in your writing.
Right. You want to sound approachable.
Exactly.
Even in writing.
Yeah. So the guide gives us some good ways to start these conversations.
Okay. Like what?
Like a simple, thank you for reaching out to us.
Yeah.
That's a nice way to begin. Or, we appreciate your email and we'll assist you shortly.
Okay.
That sets an expectation for the customer.
Yeah.
What do you think the benefit of starting with a thank you is?
It shows that you appreciate the customer contacting you. And it sets a positive tone for the conversation.
Yeah, it shows you value them reaching out.
Exactly.
And when you're giving information in writing, clarity is super important.
Right.
The guide gives examples like, according to our records, your order was shipped on date.
Yeah.
Very direct and gives a key piece of info. Or, if you need to give instructions, break it down step by step.
Yeah.
Something like, here are the steps to resolve your issue. 1, 2, 3. It just makes it much easier to follow.
Why do you think that step-by-step format is so effective in writing?
It makes it easier to understand. Like, you're breaking things down into smaller pieces.
Yeah.
So it's less overwhelming.
Right.
And it's less likely that the customer will get confused. Exactly. And just like ending a phone call politely, closing emails and chats well is important.
Yeah, for sure.
The guide suggests phrases like, please let us know if you need further assistance,
Okay.
which leaves the door open. They can contact you again.
Yeah.
And a simple, we're happy to help anytime. That reinforces that you're there for them.
Yeah. Those closing remarks really shape the whole experience for the customer.
Right. The guide has some good examples of how these phrases look in action.
Cool.
Like, for example, if a customer emails, I haven't received my package yet.
Okay.
The agent could reply, thank you for contacting us. I've checked your order, and it was shipped on date. The estimated delivery is date. Please let me know if you don't receive it by then.
I like that.
That's thorough, it gives key details, and it offers a clear call to action for the customer.
That's good. And how about live chat? What do they have for that?
Okay, so for a live chat example, let's say the customer says, the product I received is damaged. The agent could say, I'm sorry to hear that. Could you please send a photo of the damage? We'll arrange a replacement right away.
Yeah, perfect. You're acknowledging the issue, asking for the info that you need, and immediately proposing a solution.
Exactly. I think these written examples really highlight how important it is to be clear and provide specific details.
Oh, for sure.
You don't have that back and forth like you do in a spoken conversation.
Right.
So you really have to anticipate what information the customer is going to need.
Exactly. You have to be one step ahead.
Yeah. Now let's get into a really important part of customer service.
Okay.
Handling complaints and problems.
Yeah, that's a big one.
The guide is right. This requires not just the right phrases, but also a lot of patience and genuine problem-solving skills.
Yeah.
Dealing with unhappy customers can be tough.
It can be really tough.
But, it's also a huge opportunity to turn a bad experience into a good one.
That's a good way to look at it.
The guide says the first step is a sincere apology.
Makes sense?
Like, I'm sorry for the inconvenience.
Yeah.
Or, we apologize for the issue you're facing. Those can go a long way. Why do you think that apology is so important?
It shows that you're listening and that you care about their problem.
Yeah.
It makes them feel heard.
It's like you're saying, we understand this is a problem.
Right.
And we're taking responsibility for it.
Yeah.
Even if it wasn't, directly your fault.
Exactly. And often, just that apology can de-escalate things.
Yeah, that makes sense. So then you got to move on to fixing the problem.
Right.
The guide suggests phrases like, we can offer you a refund or a replacement. Which would you prefer?
Oh, okay.
That gives the customer a choice.
Yeah, I like that.
And a sense of control.
It makes them feel empowered.
Right.
Yeah.
If it's something you can't fix right away, you could say, let me escalate this to our manager for further assistance.
Yeah.
Which, sets expectations for what's going to happen next.
Yeah. Right. What's really important here is that you're offering concrete solutions.
Yeah. Yeah. You're not just saying sorry.
Exactly.
You're actually doing something to make things right.
Yeah, you're taking action.
And that shows the customer that you're taking them seriously.
For sure.
The guide has some good examples here too.
Perfect.
So, for example, a customer says, my order is wrong. I received a different product.
Okay. Yeah, that's frustrating.
A good agent response is, I apologize for the mistake. We'll send the correct item immediately. Would you like a return label for the wrong product?
Yeah, that covers everything.
Yeah.
You're admitting the mistake, offering a solution, and making the return process easy.
Right. Another common one is your service is too slow.
Ugh, hate when that happens.
The guide suggests responding with, I understand your frustration. Let me see how we can speed this up for you.
Yeah, could.
So you're validating their feelings and showing that you're trying to find a solution.
Exactly.
Even if it's not an instant fix.
Right.
So handling complaints well is about more than just apologizing.
Yeah.
It's about showing empathy and taking real steps to make things right.
Absolutely.
Now let's move on to the more, transactional part of customer service.
Okay.
Like checking out and payments. This is super relevant for, retail and online stores.
Right.
The guide has some really practical phrases here.
Okay.
For example, when it's time to pay, you'll often hear, "How would you like to pay, cash or card?"
Yeah.
Simple and direct. And when you're giving them the total, you can say your total comes to $50.
Yeah.
Will that be all?
Okay.
So you're confirming the amount.
Yeah.
And checking if they're finished shopping.
Right.
Why do you think it's important to ask if that's all?
To avoid any confusion
Uh-huh.
and make sure the checkout goes smoothly.
Exactly.
You're giving the customer a chance to add more or say they're done.
Right. And once the payment's gone through, confirming the order is important too.
Yeah.
So phrases like, "Your order has been placed successfully." That gives them instant reassurance.
Right.
And for online purchases, you'll receive a confirmation email shortly.
Okay.
That sets their expectations for getting more information.
Yeah, I like that.
The guide has a couple of quick examples.
Oh, perfect. Like what?
Okay, so let's say the customer says, "I'd like to pay by credit card."
Okay.
The agent could say, "Great, please insert your card or tap it on the reader."
Perfect. Nice and simple.
Yeah. And if a customer asks, "Did my payment go through?"
Okay.
the agent can say, "Yes, it was successful. Here's your receipt."
Yeah.
So that's clear confirmation and proof of the transaction.
Exactly.
In these financial interactions, being clear and concise builds trust
Oh, for sure.
and makes sure everything is accurate.
Nobody wants confusion when it comes to money.
Definitely not. Okay, last but not least,
Okay.
ending the conversation politely.
Yeah.
This may seem like a small detail, but it's really important.
It is. It's that last impression
Right.
that stays with the customer.
Those last few words can make a big difference.
Totally.
The guide suggests things like, "Thank you for your patience,"
Okay.
which is especially helpful if there were any delays.
Yeah.
And "We appreciate your business," which is a classic way to show gratitude.
It is. And it's always nice to invite further contact,
Yeah.
just so they know that you're still there to support them.
Exactly.
So things like, feel free to reach out if you need anything else.
Yeah.
Or friendly, have a great day. They just leave the customer with a positive feeling.
Exactly.
And the guide has some good examples of these too.
Yeah, it does.
Okay, cool.
So if a customer says, "Thanks for your help," a good reply is, "You're welcome. Have a wonderful day."
Perfect.
It's polite, it's professional, and it ends on a good note.
Yeah.
If the customer says, "That solves my problem,"
Okay.
the agent could say, "Great. Don't hesitate to contact us again if needed."
Perfect.
So you're reinforcing the resolution and letting them know you're there for future support.
I like it.
That final interaction really solidifies the whole experience.
It does.
So a polite and helpful closing leaves a good impression.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, the guide has some tips for English learners,
Okay.
which are really valuable for anyone in customer service.
Yeah, I bet.
These are key things to remember.
Okay, what are they?
The first one is practicing active listening.
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
You're not just hearing words. You're really trying to understand what the customer means.
And how they're feeling. That's
Yeah.
really important.
What does that look like in customer service?
It's about focusing on what they're saying,
Yeah.
both their words and their tone of voice. Ask clarifying questions. Make sure that you've understood.
Yeah.
Summarize the issue back to them,
Right.
just to make sure you're on the same page.
That's really helpful. The guide also mentions speak clearly and slowly,
Oh, yeah.
which is especially important if English isn't your first language.
Yeah,
It gives the customer more time to process what you're saying.
it does. And enunciate clearly.
Yeah.
Speak at a moderate pace, and you'll be much less likely to have misunderstandings.
Exactly. And this next one can't be stressed enough.
Oh, okay.
Use polite language.
Oh, yeah.
Always say please, thank you, and sorry
Yeah.
when it's appropriate.
It shows respect and professionalism.
It's so important.
It is.
Those little courtesies make a difference.
Totally.
And finally, the guide says, stay professional.
Yeah, even when it's hard.
Even if the customer's upset,
Yeah.
you got to keep your cool.
It's hard, but, keeping your cool and staying professional,
Yeah.
that's how you de-escalate the situation
Exactly.
and find a solution.
It shows you're committed to giving good service. The guide says that mastering all of these things builds confidence,
Yeah.
not just in, your English skills,
Mm-hmm.
but also in your ability to handle all kinds of customer service situations.
Yeah, I like that.
So to wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
you now have a whole bunch of English phrases
Yeah.
and a better understanding of, how to communicate effectively in customer service.
Mhm.
We've covered a lot,
We have.
from those first greetings to handling tricky situations
Yeah.
and ending things on a good note.
Yeah, exactly.
So here's a final thought.
Okay.
Think about one or two of the phrases we talked about today
Mm-hmm.
that you think could really make a difference in how you communicate.
Yeah.
What's a situation you might encounter
Okay.
where using one of these phrases could lead to a better outcome,
Good question.
for you and the person you're talking to?
I like that. I'm going to think about that.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, cool.
Thanks for joining me for this deep dive.
Thanks for having me. This was great.
Until next time.
Yeah. See ya.